Welcome to another MECH 1000 video. Today we are going to learn how to use Object Snap. So up until now we have had our snap mode turned on, or at least you should have it turned on. I would say that you probably want to have some form of snap turned on at all times. So as a quick reminder, we can adjust the snap settings for our snap mode. By default, the snap spacing is put to 0.5 inches. And what that means is that we can, say if we're going to draw a line, when we choose a starting point for that line, rather than choosing a purely arbitrary point, we jump in half-inch increments to coordinates that line up with the intersection of these grid lines that we see in the background. So it forces us to choose precise points, precise locations, rather than just some random coordinate point in between the grid lines. So we always want to be precise when selecting points. And grid snap or snap mode helps us to do that. But there's another whole different category of snap, which I actually prefer to use. So I suggest that snap mode is great when you're starting out for a beginner, but after you've kind of got the hang of AutoCAD and you get a little bit more advanced, I think you're going to want to move on to this object snap. So the object snap icon is down here in the lower right. It looks like a square with another square or grip in the top left corner. And what I would recommend is that you only have one of these two snap modes turned on at one time. They have a tendency to interfere with each other if they're both turned on. So if you're going to turn on Object Snap, you should probably turn off Grid Snap. So in order for Object Snap to really work, we need some geometry on our screen. We need some objects drawn. So I'll draw a line. I'll draw a circle, and I'll draw a rectangle. And I'll turn off the snap mode now, and I'll turn on the Object Snap. Now, before we start using Object Snap, let's look at its settings. So there's a pull-down arrow beside the icon. Let's click on that, and it shows us all the different types of object snap settings that are available. And the ones that have check marks next to them are turned on. The ones that do not have check marks are turned off. So AutoCAD is all about personal preference. You may find some of these more useful than others, so I encourage you to experiment with them. But if you just want to go with my recommendations to start off, I would definitely turn on endpoint, midpoint, and center, geometric center as well. Node I don't find to be all that useful, so I leave it turned off. I definitely use quadrant and intersection. Extension I don't really use. Insertion is, I could go either way with insertion. I usually only use it when I'm using text, and since we haven't really gotten into using text yet, I'll go ahead and turn that off. Perpendicular is good. Tangent I like. Nearest is one that I like to have turned on, but it can sometimes cause some issues for a beginning user, so I'm going to recommend that you turn that off. And then the last two I do not use. So those are my preferences, and let me explain how these work. So if I want to start another line, let's say, so I have my snap mode turned off. My cursor is just smoothly moving across the screen, choosing all sorts of random coordinates, nothing specific, but I do want to make sure that when I choose the starting point for this line, I choose a specific point. What Object Snap allows me to do is to choose a specific point like the end point of this line that I already have drawn. That green square shows up, and when you get close to it, it's almost like you're cursor is drawn to it, almost like a magnet. It snaps to it. So I can snap to the end point of that line. I can snap to the midpoint of the line. I can snap to the other end point. I can snap to the center of the circle. I can snap to a corner, which is the end point of these polylines, or I can snap to the geometric center of the rectangle. Okay, so that will allow me to draw a line from, let's say, the end point to the center, to the geometric center, to this midpoint. Okay, so Object Snap allows me to pick specific points of the geometry I already have drawn. So these are not arbitrary, they're not approximate, they are precise. This is exactly the center of that circle. That is exactly the geometric center of the rectangle. That point is exactly the midpoint of that polyline. So let's go through them one at a time. So endpoint is pretty straightforward. Endpoint allows you to choose the endpoint of a line or the endpoint of a polyline. And its icon is a green square. And so when you're close to the endpoint of a line, that green square shows up. When that green square is there, if you click, you know you've got it. You clicked on exactly the endpoint of that line. So that one's pretty straightforward. Midpoint is also pretty straightforward. You just get close to a point and a midpoint, and the green triangle shows up. So we've got midpoints of lines or polylines. Whenever we're close to it, that triangle appears, and we know, yes, we've got it. That's exactly the midpoint of that line. So we can draw a line like from that midpoint to that midpoint. Center refers to the center of circles. Now the center object snap can be a little tricky. I'm going to draw another circle here. I'll turn my grid snap on just so I can make sure I'm choosing a precise point. Since I'm drawing it over here in space, I'm not selecting any feature of the objects I already have drawn. Now I'll turn it back off again. So sometimes if you just move your cursor real quickly to where the center of the circle is supposed to be, it doesn't pop up. It can be like, where is it? Come on, the center should be here. Why am I not snapping to its center? So if you're ever having any trouble snapping to the center of a circle, here's the little trick. You move over to the circle itself. Don't click on the circle, but just touch it with your cursor. And that center mark will appear, and then you can move your cursor back to it and snap to it. So we can snap to center. Sometimes it doesn't like to show up right away, and if you have any trouble, like I said, just kind of hover your cursor over the circle itself. That'll make the center mark appear. Geometric center is a relatively new object snap. I'm going to draw another rectangle here. So it works for rectangles and other types of polygons that have a geometric center but aren't necessarily circles. So rectangles are obviously the most common type of polygon that we're going to use. And so it allows you to snap to, see, that's a good example there. I had my snap mode still turned on, and I was wanting to choose the center of that rectangle, but because it doesn't lie exactly on one of my grid intersections, the cursor kind of dances all around it. So that's what I mean when I say that the two different types of snap interfere with each other. So let's turn that off, and then I can click on the geometric center of that rectangle. That's a relatively new addition to the Object Snap feature, and I really like it. Quadrant. I'm just going to skip to the ones that I like. Quadrant can be used to select the 4 quadrant points of a circle. If you think of it as a clock face, it's like 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 9 o'clock. So you can snap to those quadrant points. Intersection, as its name implies, it just simply refers to any point where two lines intersect, two lines or two polylines. So I drew a line there that intersects the side of that rectangle, and I can then come in here and snap to the intersection. Its icon is a green X. So I could draw from that intersection to that midpoint, for example. Perpendicular and tangent are somewhat unique in that they really only work for the second click when drawing a feature. So I'll draw a line out here. I'll draw one that's not vertical or horizontal, one that's kind of diagonal. And I'll choose my starting point for this line to be just somewhere out in space. I'll turn off my snap mode, my grid snap. And then with the second click, right there is the perpendicular point. So if I select that on that line, what I've done is I've drawn this line in such a way that it's perpendicular to this one. I can put a angular dimension on here, and you can see, okay, it's lagging here a little bit. It's because I've got my my dynamic input is turned on. I don't usually have it turned on. I'm not a fan of the dynamic input. I'm going to turn that off. There we go. That's much better. So there we go. That's a perfect 90-degree angle. So you can't draw this perpendicular line by starting it on the line itself, and because then you have nothing else for it to be perpendicular to. So perpendicular is a little bit unique in that it is used as the second click. You start it with some other type of snap, either grid snap or some other object snap, and with your second click to make the second endpoint of the line, you can make it perpendicular. And tangent works the same way. So I can start a line that's out here in space somewhere, and if I want it to be tangent to that circle, when I get close to the tangent point, there's the icon, I can click, and so now this line is perfectly tangent to that circle, which means that if this circle were to extend beyond this circle, it would intersect the circle at exactly one point. So it basically just grazes the side of the circle perfectly. That's what tangent means. Okay, so those are all the object snaps that I like. You can try experimenting with some of the others if you like, but I really do think that these object snaps will give you all of the snapping ability you need to do all the drawings in this class. When we do eventually learn about text, I will show you how to use the insertion object snap as well. Okay, so that does it for object snaps. If you have any questions, be sure to let your instructor know.